former FBI hostage negotiator walks into a room at Harvard Law School. Across the table sit two professors, one who literally wrote the book on negotiation, and another who spent 8 years negotiating for the Israeli military. They smile at him. Then one of them says, "We've got your son. Give us $1 million or he dies." What happens next shouldn't be possible. The FBI agent, a guy with no Harvard degree, no fancy theories, no acronyms, takes them both apart. And he does it with a single question. A question so simple, it sounds almost stupid. The techniques in this book didn't come from a classroom. They were forged in the most dangerous negotiations on earth, where getting it wrong doesn't cost you money. It costs someone their life. This is Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. Over the next 90 minutes, I'll walk you through every key idea in this book, every technique, every story, from hostage standoffs in Harlem, to kidnappings in Haiti, to the moment an FBI agent sat across from Harvard's brightest minds and made them look like amateurs. And here's the thing, none of this is just about hostages. These are tools you can use tomorrow, in a salary negotiation, at a car dealership, with your landlord, your boss, or your teenager who refuses to go to bed on time. Because here's the truth Chris Voss learned after 24 years in the FBI. Life is negotiation. Every conversation where someone wants something from someone else is a negotiation. And most of us are losing those conversations every single day without even realizing it. So what if there was a system, not a theory, not a philosophy, a tested, refined, battle-hardened system built from thousands of real negotiations where failure meant someone died? That system exists, and it starts with a story about why everything the experts taught us was wrong. Chapter 1. The New Rules. Before we get to the techniques themselves, you need to understand why the old way of negotiating is broken. Because for decades, the smartest people in the world believed that negotiation was a math problem, a logic puzzle. If you could just find the right formula, the right combination of offers and counter-offers, you could solve any deal the way you'd solve an equation. The epicenter of this belief was Harvard. In 1981, two professors named Roger Fisher and William Ury published a book called Getting to Yes. It became the Bible of negotiation. It was taught in every business school on the planet, and its core idea was elegant. Separate the emotion from the problem, focus on interests instead of positions, and work cooperatively toward a solution that benefits everyone. Sounds reasonable, right? Logical, civilized. And for a while, everyone bought in, including the FBI. But then people started dying. In 1992, federal agents tried to use rational problem solving at Ruby Ridge in Idaho. A woman and her 14-year-old son were killed. A year later, the same kind of approach was used at the Branch Davidian compound in Waco, Texas. 76 people died in that disaster, including 25 children. Now ask yourself, have you ever tried to reason with someone who is terrified? Someone who believes they are the Messiah? Someone holding a gun to another person's head? You can't create a win-win with that person. Logic doesn't calm their fear. Rational arguments don't make them feel safe. And that's when something shifted inside the FBI. After Waco, a deputy attorney general published a report demanding changes, and the FBI formed a new unit, the Critical Incident Response Group, dedicated to reinventing crisis negotiation from the ground up. Around the same time, at the University of Chicago, two researchers were quietly dismantling the idea that humans are rational actors. Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman, the psychologist who would eventually win a Nobel Prize, proved that our decisions are driven not by logic, but by deeply irrational, emotionally charged mental processes. They called these cognitive biases, and they found more than 150 of them. Think about what that means. If every person at a negotiating table is being driven by unconscious fears, desires, and biases, then building your strategy around logic is like trying to steer a ship by talking to the sails instead of reading the wind. Kahneman eventually laid all of this out in his bestseller Thinking, Fast and Slow. The core idea is this: we have two systems of thought. System 1 is fast, instinctive, emotional. System 2 is slow, deliberate, logical. And here's the kicker: System 1 is in charge. It isn't the servant of our rational brain. It's the master. Our feelings decide first, and our logic scrambles to justify what our gut already chose. So while Harvard was teaching future CEOs to negotiate with spreadsheets and acronyms, the FBI, a bunch of street cops, former soldiers, and crisis counselors, began building a system rooted in psychology, empathy, and emotional intelligence. The Ivy League taught math. The FBI became experts in feelings, and their way worked. Which brings us back to that room at Harvard. A year after his first visit, Chris Voss talked his way into Harvard Law School's winter negotiation course. 144 students, the best and brightest from Harvard, MIT, and Tufts, and Voss was the only outsider. They paired off for mock negotiations. Voss sat across from a guy named Andy, a sharp, confident Harvard student who wore his intellectual superiority like a tailored suit. Andy made his opening offer, backed it up with an airtight, logical argument, and waited for Voss to respond, and Voss just looked at him. Then he said 5 words. "How am I supposed to do that?" Andy blinked. He wasn't sure what to do with that, so he adjusted his offer and gave another perfectly logical explanation. Voss listened, nodded, and asked the same question again. "How am I supposed to do that?" This went on for a while. By the end, Andy had given Voss literally every dollar in his budget, including money he was supposed to hold in reserve. When the instructor asked Voss to share his result, her face went red. She couldn't believe it. The next day, Voss did the same thing to another partner, destroyed his budget. It wasn't a fluke, it was a pattern, and it revealed something powerful. The emotionally intelligent techniques the FBI had developed for hostage situations didn't just work on terrorists and kidnappers. They worked on everyone, in every domain, in every relationship. That realization is the foundation of this entire book. Negotiation is not a battle of arguments. It's a process of discovery. And the person who listens, truly listens, wins. Chapter 2. Be a Mirror. September 30th, 1993. A brisk autumn morning in Brooklyn. 2 masked men storm into a Chase Manhattan bank on 7th Avenue. They crack the 60-year-old security guard across the skull with a revolver and drag him to the bathroom. They pistol whip one of the tellers. Then one of them puts his gun in the other teller's mouth, pulls the trigger on an empty chamber, and says, "Next one is real. Now open the vault." This was Chris Voss's first real hostage negotiation. He'd been training for about 1.5 years, and before this, he'd been working terrorism cases. He'd actually helped break up a plot to bomb the Holland and Lincoln tunnels, but hostage negotiation was what he lived for, and this was his moment. Now, when Voss and his team arrived, the word was that this would be quick. The hostage takers supposedly wanted to surrender. Easy day. Except none of that was true. The lead hostage taker, a man the FBI would eventually identify as Chris Voss, was running his own counterintelligence operation from inside the bank. He fed the negotiators fake information. He claimed he had a team of international co-conspirators. He kept hanging up the phone. He kept changing his mind. Every time it seemed like progress was being made, Watts would throw up another wall. So what do you do when you're dealing with someone who is lying, stalling, and trying to confuse you at every turn? How do you get information out of someone who doesn't want to give it to you? Voss teaches us the first tool. It's called mirroring, and it is almost absurdly simple. A mirror, in negotiation terms, is when you repeat the last 1 to 3 words, or the most critical words, of what someone just said. That's it. You just repeat their words back to them. It sounds too simple to work, but here's what happens neurologically. Mirroring triggers an instinct deep in the human brain. We fear what is different, and we are drawn to what is similar. When you repeat someone's words, their unconscious mind hears a signal that says, "This person is like me. This person understands me." And so they keep talking. They elaborate. They explain. They reveal things they never intended to reveal. 5 hours into the standoff, Voss took over the phone from the original negotiator. He switched into what he calls the late-night FM DJ voice. Deep, slow, calm, and reassuring. A voice that says without words, "I'm in control. Everything is going to be all right." He told Watts, "We've identified every car on the street. We've talked to all the owners except one. There's a blue and gray van out there. Do you know anything about it?" And Watts blurted out, "The other vehicle's not out there because you guys chased my driver away." Voss mirrored him immediately. "We chased your driver away?" And Watts kept going. He started vomiting information, talking about an accomplice the FBI didn't even know existed. That single mirror gave them a lead that helped them nail the getaway driver. But here's where it gets even better. The second hostage taker, a man named Bobby Goodwin, eventually came on the phone, and Bobby was terrified. He'd been tricked into the robbery. He hadn't signed up for this. Voss could hear it in his voice. The man was speaking through fabric, trying to mask his identity. Jumpy, desperate, so Voss kept his voice low and steady. That DJ voice. Nobody's going anywhere. Nobody's going to get hurt. After about 90 seconds, Bobby's voice cleared. The muffling stopped, and he said 4 words that changed everything. "I trust you, Joe." He'd gotten the negotiator's name wrong. He thought Voss was the first guy. But it didn't matter. Trust had been built, not through logic, not through promises, through the simple, powerful act of making another human being feel heard. Voss walked Bobby through the surrender. He promised to be the one waiting outside the door. Bobby came out with his hands up, one down. Eventually Watts came out too, still scanning the parking lot for an escape route right up until the handcuffs clicked shut. Nobody was hurt. The bad guys were in custody, and Voss walked away understanding something fundamental. The most powerful tool in any verbal communication is not your argument, it's your voice. The way you say something matters infinitely more than what you say. There are really only 3 voice tones a negotiator needs. The late-night FM DJ voice, calm, slow, downward inflecting, for when you need to project authority without triggering defensiveness. The positive and playful voice, light, easygoing, your default in most conversations, because people think faster and collaborate more when they're in a good mood. And the direct or assertive voice, which you should almost never use because it makes people feel dominated, and dominated people fight back. Mirroring works in everyday life just as well as it works in hostage negotiations. One of Voss's students had an impulsive boss who was famous for storming into people's offices with terrible ideas. One day, the boss popped in and announced they needed to make 2 full copies of thousands of documents from a consulting project. She looked at him and said, "I'm sorry, 2 copies?" He paused and explained, "One for us, one for the client." She mirrored again. "So the client is asking for a copy, and we need one for internal use?" He paused longer. Actually, the client hadn't asked for anything, but he wanted an in-house copy. "Anywhere?" she mirrored when he said she could store them wherever. He sat back, thought about it, told her to just make 2 digital backups instead. The next day, he emailed to confirm digital copies were fine. A week of unnecessary work avoided, with 1 word repeated back to him 4 times. That is the power of the mirror. It lets you disagree without being disagreeable. It lets you redirect a conversation without ever saying no. And it costs you nothing but the willingness to shut up and listen. Chapter 3. Tactical Empathy and Labeling. It was 1998, and Chris Voss was standing in a narrow hallway on the 27th floor of a high-rise apartment building in Harlem. Behind the door in front of him were at least 3 heavily armed fugitives. A few days earlier, these men had been in a shootout with a rival gang using automatic weapons. Now they were cornered. Behind Voss, an FBI SWAT team was lined up in the hallway, and snipers on nearby rooftops had their rifles trained on the apartment windows. There was one problem, a big one. They had no phone number for the apartment, no way to call in. So for 6 straight hours, Voss and 2 other FBI agents took turns doing something that sounds almost absurd. They talked through the door. No demands, no ultimatums, no clever arguments. Voss just used his late-night FM DJ voice and said the same kinds of things over and over. It looks like you don't want to come out. It seems like you worry that if you open the door, we'll come in with guns blazing. It looks like you don't want to go back to jail. For 6 hours, they got absolutely nothing back, not a sound. The FBI coaches watching from behind loved Voss's technique, but everyone was starting to wonder, is anybody even in there? Then a sniper on an adjacent building radioed in. He'd seen a curtain move. Slowly, the front door of the apartment opened. A woman stepped out with her hands raised. Voss kept talking. One by one, all 3 fugitives emerged. Not a single shot fired, not a single person hurt. When Voss asked them afterward why they finally gave in, all 3 gave him the exact same answer. We didn't want to get caught or get shot, but you calmed us down. We finally believed you wouldn't go away, so we just came out. Think about that. 3 armed, dangerous people surrendered, not because they were outgunned, not because they were outsmarted, but because someone on the other side of a door made them feel understood. This is what Voss calls tactical empathy. And it's not what most people think empathy means. Empathy, in the way Voss teaches it, is not about being nice. It's not about agreeing with someone. It's not about giving hugs or validating their worldview. It is the ability to recognize another person's perspective and then to vocalize that recognition out loud. You don't have to agree with what they feel. You just have to show them that you see it. Because the moment another human being feels truly seen, something shifts in their brain, their defenses start to come down, and they start listening. But tactical empathy goes one step further. It's not just understanding what someone feels in the moment. It's hearing what's behind those feelings, so you can use that understanding to influence every moment that follows. It's emotional intelligence on steroids. And the primary tool for deploying tactical empathy is something called labeling. Labeling is deceptively simple. You observe what the other person is feeling through their words, their tone, their body language, and you give that feeling a name, out loud. The trick is in the phrasing. You never start with I. You never say, I'm hearing that you're frustrated, or I think you're scared. The word I makes it about you. Instead, you use neutral phrases. It seems like, it sounds like, it looks like. Why does this work? Because when you accurately name someone's emotion, something remarkable happens in their brain. A neuroscience study at UCLA found that when people see images of faces showing strong emotion, the fear center of their brain, the amygdala, lights up. But when they're asked to label that emotion in words, the activity shifts away from the amygdala and toward the rational thinking centers. In other words, simply naming a fear begins to dissolve its power. Voss learned early in his career that the fastest way to diffuse a negative situation is to go directly at it. He tells a story about a time he entered Canada without getting the proper clearance from the top FBI official there, a serious breach of protocol. The guy had every right to throw Voss out of the country. So Voss called him and opened with this: "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned." Long silence on the other end. Who is this? "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned." It's Chris Voss. Another long silence. Then the official asked if Voss's boss knew he was there, and after a tense pause, he said, "All right, you've got country clearance. I'll take care of the paperwork." By naming the offense before the other person could, Voss took the sting out of it. He acknowledged the negative so completely that there was nothing left for the other person to be angry about. This is the key principle. Labeling negatives diffuses them. Labeling positives reinforces them. And when you do it well, people don't even notice it's happening. One of the most beautiful examples of labeling in the book comes from a woman who was fundraising for the Girl Scouts. She was experienced. She regularly got donors to write checks for $10,000 to $25,000. Her system was simple: invite a wealthy woman to her office, show her an album of heartwarming photos and letters from projects that matched her interests, and wait for the checkbook to come out. One day she met the immovable donor. Nothing worked. Project after project. The woman shook her head at everyone, feeling the meeting slipping away. The fundraiser reached for a label. "I'm sensing some hesitation with these projects," she said, and the woman uncorked. "I want my gift to directly support programming for Girl Scouts and not anything else. Progress." But the woman still rejected every project that seemed to fit. So the fundraiser tried another label, this time going deeper. "It seems like you are really passionate about this gift and want to find the right project, reflecting the opportunities and life-changing experiences the Girl Scouts gave you." The woman looked at her. Then she pulled out her checkbook and signed it, without even picking a specific project. "You understand me," she said. "I trust you'll find the right project." Think about what happened here. The first label uncovered the surface concern. She didn't want her money wasted. But the second label reached something deeper, the emotional memory of being a little Girl Scout and how it changed her life. That was the real driver. And once it was named, everything else solved itself. This is what Voss means when he talks about clearing the road before advertising the destination. Before you can propose solutions, before you can make offers, you have to identify and dissolve the emotional barriers standing in the way. And the way you do that is by naming them, dragging them into the light, because fears that are spoken lose their fangs. Voss takes this principle even further with something he calls the accusation audit. Before any high-stakes negotiation, you sit down and list every terrible thing the other side could possibly say about you. Every accusation, every grievance, and then you say them first. It sounds insane. It feels like handing your opponent ammunition. But here's why it works. When you voice someone's worst accusations before they do, those accusations suddenly sound exaggerated. The other person's instinct is to push back. No, it's not that bad. And just like that, you've turned a potential attack into a moment of connection. Every time Voss introduces this concept to his students, they say the same thing. "Oh God, we can't do that. It feels artificial, self-destructive." But then he reminds them, he did exactly this on the first day of class, when he told them that volunteering for a role-play exercise was going to be horrible. And every time more people volunteer than he needs, the lesson is simple. Don't run from the negative. Don't deny it. Don't pretend it's not there. Name it, label it, bring it into the open, and watch it lose its power. Chapter 4. The Power of No. Picture this. You are sitting at home before dinner. The phone rings. It's a telemarketer. He butchers your name, drops some phony pleasantry, and launches into his pitch. Do you enjoy a nice glass of water from time to time? Well, yes. And like me, I bet you like water that's crisp and clean, with no chemical aftertaste. Well, yes, but you know what's happening. You can feel it. He's steering you down a path with no exits, funneling you toward the one answer he wants. Yes. And every cell in your body rebels against it. You feel trapped, defensive, hunted. So here's the question. If being pushed toward yes makes you feel this awful, why do we keep doing it to other people in our negotiations? For decades, every negotiation book, every sales training, every corporate strategy was built around the same gospel. Get to yes. Get the other person nodding. Build momentum with a series of small agreements until the big yes becomes inevitable. But Voss says this is completely backwards because there are 3 kinds of yes, and 2 of them are worthless. The first is the counterfeit yes. This is the one the telemarketer's victim gives. It means, I'll say whatever you want, so you'll leave me alone. The second is the confirmation yes, a reflexive, throwaway agreement. Yes, the sky is blue. True, but it commits the person to nothing. The third, and the only one that matters, is the commitment yes, a genuine decision that leads to action. The problem is, all 3 sound exactly the same, and if you're so busy chasing the word yes that you can't tell the difference, you're going to think you've got a deal when all you've got is someone who wants you to stop talking. Now think about the word no. We treat it like poison, rejection, failure, the end of the conversation. But Voss sees it as the exact opposite. No is where the negotiation actually begins. Why? Because no makes people feel safe. It gives them the feeling of control. When someone says no, they've protected themselves. They've drawn a boundary, and from inside that safe space, they can actually start to think clearly about what they do want. Voss learned this lesson at the very beginning of his career. When he walked into Amy Bondero's office, she ran the FBI's crisis negotiation team in New York, and told her he wanted to be a hostage negotiator. Her answer was no. Do you have any training? No. Any credentials? No. Experience? No. A degree in anything related? No. She looked at him and said, "Looks like you answered your own question. Now go away." But Voss didn't leave. He pushed. "Come on, there has to be something I can do." And Amy, with a laugh that said she didn't think he'd actually follow through, told him to volunteer at a suicide hotline, then come talk to her. No guarantees. 5 months later, Voss showed up again. He'd done it. And Amy was stunned because she told everyone to volunteer at that hotline, and nobody ever actually did. But think about what happened in that original conversation. Every single no Amy gave him was a gateway, a redirect. Each one narrowed the path until the one yes that mattered, you get the next position, became possible. The word no didn't end the conversation. It was the conversation. Voss's colleague, Marty Evelsizer, proved this in spectacular fashion. Marty was the FBI's crisis negotiation coordinator in Pittsburgh, talented, respected, and so successful that her boss got jealous. When a local police department picked Marty for a prestigious role, choosing her over her own supervisor, that supervisor decided to fire her. Marty sat down for the meeting knowing her options were almost non-existent. He had every right to remove her, but she'd prepared one question. She looked at him and said, "Do you want the FBI to be embarrassed?" "No," he said. "What do you want me to do?" He leaned back in his chair, paused, nodded. "Look," he said, "you can keep the position. Just don't let it interfere with your other duties." One question, framed to invite no, and it saved her career. Here's why it worked. By asking a question that could only be answered with no, Marty put her boss in the driver's seat. He wasn't being pushed toward compliance. He was making a choice. He felt in control, and from that position of control, he was far more willing to be reasonable. Voss has found that this works everywhere. If you're trying to sell something, don't open with, "Do you have a few minutes to talk?" That begs for a reflexive yes that doesn't mean anything. Instead, ask, "Is now a bad time to talk?" Either they say, "Yes, it's a bad time," and tell you when to call back, or they say, "No, it's fine," and now they're fully present because they chose to be. One of Voss's graduate students tested this in political fundraising. For years, his team had used a traditional yes pattern script. "Do you believe gas prices are too high?" "Yes." "Do you believe we need change?" "Yes." "Can I have your credit card number?" And the answer, more often than not, was no. So the student flipped the script. "Do you feel that if things stay the way they are, America's best days are ahead of it?" "No." "Are you going to sit back and watch without putting up a fight?" "No." The no-oriented script outperformed the yes-oriented one by 23%. And here's one more trick Voss shares, an email technique for when someone has gone silent on you. When all your polite follow-ups have been ignored, you send one sentence: "Have you given up on this project?" That's it. It's a no-oriented question that plays on the other person's fear of loss. They almost always respond immediately: "No, we haven't given up. We've just been busy." Because nobody wants to be the person who abandoned something. It provokes engagement precisely because it invites the word no. The lesson of this chapter flips everything you thought you knew. Stop chasing yes. Start inviting no. Because no isn't a wall, it's a door. And on the other side of it, the real conversation is waiting. Chapter 5. The two most powerful words in any negotiation. In August 2000, a militant Islamic group called Abu Sayyaf kidnapped a 24-year-old American named Jeffrey Schilling in the southern Philippines. They slapped a $10 million ransom on his head and put a terrorist named Abu Sabaya in charge of the negotiations. Sabaya was not your average kidnapper. He had a history of rape, murder, and beheadings, and he liked to record his crimes on video and send them to the media. He always wore sunglasses and a bandana. He had reporters on speed dial because he loved being on CNN. "They should make a movie about me," he would tell journalists. Chris Voss was sent to Manila as the lead negotiator for the FBI. His job was to come up with a strategy, get it approved, and get Schilling home alive. The problem was that Sabaya was smart. He'd calculated his $10 million number based on cold business logic. The US was offering $5 million for information on the 1993 World Trade Center bombers, and a rival group had just been paid $20 million for European hostages. So in Sabaya's mind, one American equaled at least $10 million. But here's the thing: Schilling came from a working-class family. His mother could maybe scrape together $10,000. The United States government wasn't going to pay a dime, and Sabaya wouldn't budge. For months, no matter what approach the negotiating team tried, logic, reasoning, questioning, Sabaya stuck to his demand. He called it war damages, not ransom, war damages, and launched into long speeches about 500 years of Muslim oppression in the Philippines, fishing rights, historical atrocities, on and on. He also occasionally dropped in threats that he was torturing Schilling. The negotiations were being conducted through a Filipino military officer named Benjay. The FBI would advise Benjay, and Benjay would talk to Sabaya in Tagalog, but they were stuck, dead stuck. The war damages demand was a wall that nothing could penetrate. And then Voss decided to try something. He didn't fully understand the power of it yet, but he trusted the process. He wrote a 2-page document instructing Benjay to change course completely. Instead of arguing with Sabaya or trying to separate Schilling from the war damages nonsense, Benjay was going to do something radical. He was going to agree with Sabaya, not agree to pay, not agree to the demand. He was going to use every active listening tool in the arsenal. Silence, encourages, mirroring, labeling, paraphrasing, and then deliver a full summary of Sabaya's worldview. Every grievance, every injustice, every piece of the 500-year history of oppression that Sabaya believed in. Benjay was going to repeat it all back, in his own words, with full emotional acknowledgement. 2 days later, Sabaya called. Benjay listened. Then he followed the script. He mirrored, he labeled, he let Sabaya talk until the words ran dry, and then, carefully and completely, he summarized everything Sabaya had been saying for months, not mocking it, not dismissing it, articulating the world according to Abu Sabaya with total accuracy and emotional respect. Sabaya went silent. For nearly a minute, neither man spoke. Then finally 2 words: "That's right." And the war damages demand vanished, gone. From that moment forward, Sabaya never mentioned money again. Not 10 million, not 1 million, not a single dollar. He eventually grew so tired of the whole situation that he let his guard down, and Schilling escaped from the camp. Philippine commandos swooped in and brought him home. 2 weeks after the escape, Sabaya called Benjay one last time. "Have you been promoted yet?" he asked. "If not, you should have been. And then he said something that still gives Voss chills. "I was going to hurt Jeffrey. I don't know what you did to keep me from doing that, but whatever it was, it worked." Think about what happened there. A terrorist with a history of beheading hostages, calmed. A $10 million demand, dissolved. Not through threats, not through force, not through compromise. Through 2 words. That's right. Those 2 words are, according to Voss, the most powerful words in any negotiation. More powerful than yes, more powerful than I agree. Because when someone says that's right, they are not performing compliance. They are experiencing a moment of recognition. They feel that their worldview has been fully seen and fully understood, and that feeling creates the psychological conditions for real change. This is different from "you're right," and the difference matters enormously. Voss explains it with a story about his son Brandon, who played football. Brandon was a big kid, 6'2", 250, and he loved hitting people. When his coach moved him to linebacker, he was supposed to avoid blockers and get to the ball carrier, but Brandon kept smashing into blockers head-on instead. His coach talked to him about it. Voss talked to him about it. And every time Brandon said the same thing, "You're right," then he'd go right back to what he was doing before. Think about what "you're right" actually means. When has someone said it to you? Usually it's when you won't stop talking and they want you to go away. It means, "I hear you, now please shut up." It's a polite dismissal, not an agreement. So Voss tried a different approach. Before a crucial game, he pulled Brandon aside and said, "You seem to think it's unmanly to dodge a block. You think it's cowardly to get out of someone's way." Brandon stared at him. "That's right," he said. And from that moment, something clicked. Brandon understood why he'd been doing what he was doing. The behavior wasn't stubbornness, it was pride. And once that was named and acknowledged, he could let it go. He started dodging blocks, became an exceptional linebacker, and his team won every remaining game. The recipe for triggering "that's right" is a summary. And a good summary has 2 ingredients: paraphrasing the other person's words in your own language, plus labeling the emotions underneath those words. You combine what they said with what they feel, and you deliver it back to them as a complete picture. When it lands, the only possible response is "that's right." And when you hear it, you know the real negotiation can begin. Chapter 6. Bend their reality. One Monday morning in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, a call came in to the FBI office from the nephew of a prominent local politician. Kidnappers had snatched his aunt from her car. Their demand, $150,000, pay up or she dies. Now Haiti in the mid-2000s was the kidnapping capital of the world. 8 to 10 people abducted every single day in a country of 8 million. Voss, as the FBI's lead international kidnapping negotiator, had never seen anything like it. Reports rolled in hourly, students taken off school buses, missionaries ambushed in broad daylight, politicians grabbed from their homes. When the nephew called, his instinct was obvious: pay. When someone calls you and says they'll kill your aunt, paying seems like the only option. But Voss saw it differently. He always saw it differently, because here's the first lesson of this chapter, and one of the most important in the entire book. Never split the difference. We've been taught our whole lives that compromise is noble. Meet in the middle, be reasonable, find the win-win. Voss calls this one of the most destructive myths in negotiation. He puts it this way: imagine a woman wants her husband to wear black shoes with his suit. He wants to wear brown shoes, so they compromise. He wears one black shoe and one brown shoe. Is that the best outcome? No, it's the worst possible outcome. Either color would have been better than the compromise. The same logic applies to the kidnapping. The ransom demand was $150,000. The reasonable move would be to offer $75,000. Split the difference. But why? There's no validity in the original number. It was made up. The kidnappers don't deserve half of an imaginary figure, any more than they deserve the full amount. Voss's team quickly discovered something that changed the entire game. By listening carefully to the kidnappers and debriefing rescued hostages, they noticed two patterns. First, kidnapping spiked on Mondays. These guys had a strong work ethic. Second, the kidnappers grew more eager for payment as Friday approached. Why? Because these weren't ideological terrorists. They were garden variety thugs who wanted to get paid by Friday so they could party through the weekend. And you don't need $150,000 to have a good weekend in Haiti. Once they knew the kidnappers' secret deadline, everything shifted. The FBI let the pressure build by stalling negotiations until Thursday or Friday, when the kidnappers were most desperate for cash. And because all they really needed was party money, the actual settlement could be drastically lower than the original demand. Here's how the negotiation played out. Voss coached the nephew to anchor the conversation around the idea that he simply didn't have the money without ever saying the word no. Instead, he kept asking questions. How am I supposed to do that? How are we supposed to pay if you're going to hurt her? That last question was brilliant. It subtly raised the aunt's safety, the one thing the kidnappers needed to protect if they wanted any payout at all. You can't sell a commodity you've destroyed. Without being prompted, the kidnappers dropped their demand to $50,000. Then, under the pressure of more questions and no counter-offers, they came down to $25,000. Now the nephew made his first move, an extreme low anchor, $3,000. The line went dead silent. The nephew started sweating, but Voss told him to hold. This always happened. It was the moment where the kidnapper's sense of economic reality was being completely rearranged. When the kidnapper spoke again, his voice was different, shell-shocked, but he continued. He counted with 10,000. The nephew came back with a strange, very specific number, $4,751. Why such an odd number? Because non-round numbers feel calculated. They sound like the result of careful, thoughtful analysis. When you say 38,000, it sounds like a rough guess. When you say 37,893, it sounds like you've done your homework and that's genuinely the most you can pay. The kidnapper counted at 7,500. The nephew repeated his number, 4,751, and threw in a surprise. A portable CD player, completely random, completely unrelated to the negotiation, but it signaled something powerful. I have literally given you everything I have, down to the spare electronics. The kidnappers said yes. 6 hours after the abduction, the aunt came home safely. Total cost, $4,751 and a used CD player. That number, 4751, is not random. It's the product of a specific bargaining system that Voss calls the Ackerman model. We'll get into the full details later, but the core principle is this. You don't negotiate by splitting the difference. You negotiate by anchoring emotions, using calibrated questions to avoid direct confrontation, and making progressively smaller offers that signal to the other side that they are squeezing you to your absolute limit. But the techniques in this chapter go beyond hostage ransoms. Voss lays out a complete framework for how to bend someone's perception of reality in any negotiation. The word fair is one of the most powerful weapons. People comply with agreements they feel are fair, and they blow up agreements they feel are unfair. Voss has seen it in the ultimatum game, a classic psychology experiment. You give one person $10 and let them split it with a partner. If the partner accepts, they both keep their shares. If the partner rejects, nobody gets anything. Rationally, the partner should accept any amount. Even $1 is better than zero. But in practice, people reject offers they consider insulting. They would rather get nothing than accept something unfair. This same instinct operates in every negotiation you'll ever have, and the word fair can be used for you or against you. If someone says, "We just want what's fair," watch out. That's a manipulation designed to put you on the defensive and guilt you into a concession. The best response: take a deep breath and say, I apologize. Let's go back to where I started treating you unfairly and we'll fix it. But Voss's favorite use of fairness is proactive. Early in any negotiation, he says this: I want you to feel like you are being treated fairly at all times. So please stop me at any time if you feel I'm being unfair, and we'll address it. That one sentence sets the entire tone. It positions you as an honest dealer. It gives the other person permission to speak up, and it makes fairness a shared value instead of a weapon. The deeper lesson of this chapter is about loss aversion, one of the most powerful forces in human psychology. People will take far greater risks to avoid losing something than to gain something of equal value. A person who's told they have a 95% chance of winning $10,000 will usually take a guaranteed $9,500 instead. But a person told they have a 95% chance of losing $10,000 will gamble on the bigger risk to avoid the certain loss. What this means for negotiation is simple but profound. It's not enough to show someone what they'll gain from a deal. You have to make them see what they'll lose if the deal falls through. Anchor their emotions around the potential loss, and they'll move mountains to avoid it. One of Voss's students, a man named Angel Prado, used this entire toolkit to negotiate a nearly 50% raise. He anchored his boss's expectations early by suggesting that the money the company spent on his MBA should be redirected to his salary after graduation. He asked for a new title, a non-monetary concession that cost his boss nothing but created momentum. He let his boss name the first number, and when it was time to counter, he presented a range using precise, non-round figures, 134,500 to 143,000, that sounded like the product of deep calculation. His boss's eyebrows went up, but the anchoring worked. After going back and forth, the boss offered 120,000, then 127,000, then, negotiating with himself, agreed to 134,500. And when Angel used the word fair to affirm the deal and positioned his boss as a mentor, his boss said something remarkable: "I'll fight to get you this salary." That's bending reality. Not through tricks, not through manipulation, through a deep understanding of how people actually make decisions, emotionally, irrationally, and predictably, and using that understanding to guide them toward an outcome that works for everyone. Chapter 7. The Illusion of Control. In May 2001, a brutal group of radical Islamists called the Abu Sayyaf raided a private diving resort in the Philippines called Dos Palmas. They took 20 hostages, including 3 Americans, a missionary couple from Kansas named Martin and Gracia Burnham, and a California businessman named Guillermo Sobero. What followed was 13 months of absolute catastrophe. The Philippine president declared all-out war on the kidnappers. The Philippine Army and Marines fought a turf war with each other in the middle of the negotiations. The CIA, FBI, and military intelligence all got involved and fought among themselves too. The kidnappers raped and killed several hostages. Then September 11th happened, and suddenly the Abu Sayyaf was linked to Al-Qaeda. Chris Voss was sent in to make things work. The pressure was enormous. The FBI director was personally briefing the President of the United States every morning on what they were doing. But everything that could go wrong did go wrong. A donor provided $300,000 for ransom. They made the drop, and the kidnappers took the money and refused to release the Burnhams. A side deal between factions had fallen through, and the negotiator on the other end covered himself by claiming the payment was $600 short. $600. They wouldn't release hostages over $600. The whole disaster ended with a botched rescue. A squad of Philippine soldiers stumbled onto the camp and opened fire indiscriminately. Gracia Burnham was shot in the leg. Martin Burnham was hit 3 times in the chest by friendly fire. He died in his wife's arms. A Philippine nurse also died, and the terrorist leader escaped. It was the biggest failure of Chris Voss's professional career, and sitting in the dark at home afterward, He knew something fundamental had to change. As he reviewed the case files, one detail haunted him more than any other. Martin Burnham had been overheard talking on a phone at some point during captivity. Someone Voss had never heard of, a crooked Philippine politician, had been running a parallel negotiation to buy the Burnhams' freedom. And this amateur, this guy with zero FBI training, had managed to get a proof-of-life phone call with the hostage, something Voss's team had never accomplished. How did a political hack pull off something that the most elite negotiation unit in the world couldn't? The answer was painfully simple. The FBI had been trapped in a tit-for-tat mindset. Every request was a transaction. If they asked for something and got it, they'd owe something back. So they avoided asking. They avoided communication itself, out of pride and fear of creating a debt. That was the breakthrough moment. Voss realized that what they needed was a way to ask for things without it feeling like a demand, a way to get the other side working on their problems without the other side realizing that's what they were doing. And then an unrelated case handed him the answer on a silver platter. In Pittsburgh, a drug dealer had kidnapped the girlfriend of another drug dealer. The victim's boyfriend, for reasons that defy common sense, came to the FBI for help. So there they were, FBI negotiators riding around in a car with this guy while he talked to the kidnapper on the phone. Normally the FBI would have coached him to ask a carefully crafted proof-of-life question, something clinical like what's the name of her childhood pet. But nobody had briefed this guy yet, so in the middle of the conversation, he just blurted out, "Hey dog, how do I know she's all right?" The kidnapper went completely silent, 10 full seconds of nothing. And then, in a totally different tone of voice, softer, less confrontational, he said, "Well, I'll put her on the phone." Voss nearly fell out of his chair. That drug dealer, with zero training, had just accomplished something extraordinary. He'd gotten the kidnapper to volunteer a proof of life, for free. No debt created, no reciprocity triggered. The kidnapper thought it was his own idea. He felt like he was in control, and that's when Voss understood the principle that would reshape his entire approach. The secret to gaining the upper hand in any negotiation is giving the other side the illusion of control. The tool that accomplishes this is the calibrated question, an open-ended question that starts with how or what. Not can you, not do you, not will you. Those are closed-ended questions that invite a simple yes or no and trigger the expectation of reciprocity. Instead, you ask questions that require thought, questions that make the other person feel like the problem solver, questions that sound like you're asking for help, because in a way you are. How am I supposed to do that? Is the single most powerful calibrated question in existence. It says no without using the word. It puts the burden of finding a solution on the other person, and it does all of this while making them feel respected and in charge. Voss had a client, a small public relations firm, that was owed money by a large corporation. The big company kept promising future business, but never paid their bills. Voss's client felt trapped. If she pushed too hard, she'd lose the relationship. If she stayed quiet, she'd go broke. Voss told her to wait until the client asked for more work, then respond with one question. "I'd love to help, but how am I supposed to do that?" She was terrified. She thought they'd fire her on the spot. But when she finally said it, the response stunned her. "You're right, you can't, and I apologize." They gave her a new accounting contact and paid her within 48 hours. That question didn't accuse anyone of anything. It didn't threaten, it didn't demand, it simply invited the other side to look at the situation from her perspective. And when they did, the solution was obvious. Now there's one critical warning Voss attaches to all of this. None of these techniques work if you can't control your own emotions. He tells the story of a freelance marketing strategist who was owed about $7,000 by a new CEO, a penny-pinching chauvinist who'd stopped returning her calls. Voss helped her build a beautiful script, a no-oriented email to re-establish contact, labels to acknowledge his position, calibrated questions to guide him toward paying. Every tool in the book, perfectly arranged. The email worked brilliantly. The CEO called within 10 minutes, but the moment she heard his patronizing voice, her anger flared. She abandoned the script and turned the conversation into a fight. She didn't even get half of what she was owed. The lesson? Bite your tongue. When you're attacked, don't counterattack. Pause, breathe, let the impulse pass, then respond with a calibrated question. Because the moment you lose control of your emotions, you lose control of the negotiation. Chapter 8. Guarantee Execution. A few years ago, inmates at a prison in Louisiana took the warden and several staff members hostage using makeshift knives. The prisoners were tense and disorganized, a dangerous combination, but the negotiators sensed something underneath the bluster. These men didn't really want to hurt anyone. They wanted the situation to end. They were just terrified of what would happen to them when they surrendered. So the negotiators designed an elaborate ritual. The inmates would send one man out at a time. He'd walk past 3 perimeters of law enforcement, get into a paddy wagon, and be transferred to jail. Once there, he'd use a walkie-talkie to call back to the others inside and say, essentially, they didn't hurt me, it's safe. Everyone agreed. The first inmate walked out. He made it past the federal zone, past the SWAT zone, past the outer perimeter, and just as he was about to climb into the van, some guy from the perimeter squad saw the walkie-talkie and confiscated it. Inside the prison, the remaining inmates started to panic. Their buddy hadn't called. They were convinced he was being beaten. The one with the other radio called the negotiators, screaming, "They're kicking his ass. We told you." He started threatening to cut off a hostage's finger. 15 nail-biting minutes later, a SWAT officer came strolling up, proud of himself. "Some idiot gave this dude a radio," he said with a smile, holding up the confiscated walkie-talkie. The negotiators barely stopped themselves from hitting him before they sprinted to the jail to have the first inmate make the call. Crisis averted, barely. So how do you make sure your agreement doesn't fall apart the same way, destroyed by one person who wasn't in the loop? The point of that story is deceptively simple. Getting to an agreement is not the finish line. Getting it implemented is. Yes means nothing without how. A signed contract is worthless if the people who need to execute it don't believe in it or don't even know about it. This is where the calibrated how question becomes not just a negotiating tool, but an implementation tool. When your counterpart agrees to something, you don't celebrate. You ask, how will we know we're on track? How will we address things if we find we're off track? How does this affect everybody else on your team? That last question is critical, because in almost every negotiation, there are people you never see, behind the table players, who can make or break a deal. A CEO might love your proposal, but if the division head feels threatened by it, the deal dies quietly in a conference room you were never invited to. Voss learned this the hard way in private practice. His firm was closing a lucrative training deal with a big company in Florida. They'd had multiple calls with the CEO and the head of HR. Both were completely on board. Total buy-in from the top decision makers, and then the deal vanished. It turned out that the head of the division that actually needed the training killed it. Maybe he felt insulted by the implication that his people needed help. Maybe it was an ego thing. They never found out because they never thought to ask. A few simple calibrated questions. How does this affect the rest of your team? Or how do we make sure the managers of those we're training are fully on board? Would have surfaced the problem before it became fatal. It only takes one person you forgot about to destroy a deal you spent months building. The most powerful demonstration of calibrated questions as an implementation tool comes from the Ecuador kidnapping. A man named Jose, an American citizen born in Ecuador, had been running an ecotourism business with his wife Julie when armed men pulled them over on a jungle road and dragged Jose into the forest. The kidnappers demanded $5 million. They had Jose, the FBI had Julie, and Voss had a new strategy he was burning to test. He told his team, "All we're going to say is, how do we know Jose is okay? And how are we supposed to pay if we don't know he's okay?" Again and again, nothing else. The local police were furious. This wasn't how proof of life was done, but Julie understood the strategy immediately. The questions would stall for time, and she believed that with enough time, Jose would find a way home. So every time the kidnappers called, Julie hit them with questions. How do I know Jose is alive? We don't have that kind of money. How can we raise that much? How can we pay you anything if we can't confirm he's safe? The kidnapper on the other end seemed genuinely confused. He kept asking for time to think. He never got angry with Julie. Answering her questions gave him the feeling of being in control. But behind the scenes, something extraordinary was happening. Because the negotiator couldn't answer Julie's questions on his own, he kept walking back to the jungle camp to consult with the others. The entire group would have hour-long discussions about how to respond to this one woman's persistent questions. The questions did something the FBI had never achieved before. They forced internal coordination among the kidnappers. Every member of the group was now engaged in solving problems that served the FBI's goals. Over weeks of back and forth, Julie drove the ransom down to $16,500. Then, when they demanded she pay immediately, she asked, "How can I do that when I have to sell my cars and trucks?" Always buying more time. And then one night, Voss got a phone call. Jose had escaped. The constant delays and questions had caused several of the guerrillas to peel off from the group. Eventually, only one teenager was left guarding Jose at night. When a rainstorm pounded the metal roof, drowning out all sound, Jose climbed through a window, ran through the jungle, and made his way to a small town. 2 days later, he was home with Julie and their baby, just in time for their daughter's first birthday. Julie was right. With enough time, he found a way home. There's one more tool Voss teaches in this chapter that's essential for guaranteeing execution: the rule of 3. The idea is simple. Getting someone to agree to the same thing 3 times in the same conversation dramatically reduces the chance that their yes is counterfeit. But you can't just ask the same question 3 times. That sounds like an interrogation. So you vary your approach. The first time, they agree to the deal directly. The second time, you summarize what they said, and they confirm it with, "That's right." The third time, you ask a calibrated how question about implementation. What do we do if we get off track? And their answer tells you whether they truly believe in what they've committed to. It's almost impossible to fake conviction 3 times in a row. And if someone's answer starts to wobble on the second or third round, if their tone shifts, if they get vague, if they say, "I'll try," instead of committing, that's your signal. Something is wrong beneath the surface, and you need to dig deeper before you move forward. Because yes is nothing without how. And how only matters if the people saying it actually mean it. Chapter 9. Bargain Hard. Chris Voss fell in love with a truck. Not just any truck. A Toyota 4Runner in salsa red pearl. A deep, smoldering red that seemed to glow at night. He had to have it. He searched every dealer in the Washington, the 600th area, and he found exactly one at a single lot. No competition, no backup options. The salesman had all the leverage, or so the salesman thought. Voss sat down across from a guy named Stan. Stan smiled the smile of a man who knows he's about to make an easy sale, and mentioned the sticker price, $36,000. Voss nodded, pursed his lips, and then very gently rattled the cage. "I can pay $30,000, he said, "up front, all cash. I'll write a check today for the full amount. I'm sorry, I'm afraid I just can't pay any more." Stan's smile flickered. He shook his head. The sticker price was $36,000 after all. Voss looked at him with genuine respect and asked, "How am I supposed to do that?" Stan stumbled. He offered financing. Voss shook his head slowly. "It's a beautiful truck, really amazing. I can't tell you how much I'd love to have it. It's worth more than what I'm offering. I'm sorry. This is really embarrassing. I just can't do that price. Stan disappeared into the back office. He was gone so long that Voss started thinking he should have opened even lower. When Stan returned, he was beaming. His boss had approved a new price, $34,000. Voss thanked him warmly, told him the offer was generous, told him this was the car of his dreams, and then said, "I really wish I could do that. I really do. This is so embarrassing. I simply can't." Stan dropped into silence. Voss didn't take the bait. He let the quiet hang there. Stan trudged off again. He came back with $32,500. He pushed a paper across the desk that literally said, "You win." Surrounded by smiley faces, Voss thanked him again, praised his generosity, and said he simply couldn't do it. This time, Stan didn't even sit down. He walked straight back to his manager. A minute later, no eternity this time, he returned. "We can do that," he said. 2 days later, Voss drove off in his salsa red pearl Toyota 4Runner for $30,000. That story is entertaining, but there's a precise system underneath it. Every move Voss made was calculated. The emotional anchoring at the start, acknowledging the truck's value while establishing his limit. The calibrated questions when pushed, the empathetic refusals that said no without ever using the word, and the patient silence that let the other side negotiate against themselves. This is where all the tools from the book come together, and where Voss introduces one more weapon, the Ackerman model, named after a former CIA operative who built a kidnap for ransom consulting firm. The Ackerman model is a step-by-step bargaining system. It looks mechanical on paper, but it's actually built on deep psychological principles: reciprocity, loss aversion, and the anchoring power of specific numbers. Here's how it works. First, set your target price, the number you actually want. Then set your opening offer at 65% of that target. Make that first offer and wait. Use calibrated questions and empathetic refusals to get the other side to counter before you move. When you do move, raise your offer in 3 decreasing increments to 85%, then 95%, then 100% of your target. And on your final number, use a precise, non-round figure and throw in a small non-monetary item to signal that you've given absolutely everything. Think about what this does psychologically. The extreme opening anchor shocks the other side and resets their expectations. Each subsequent raise is smaller than the last. Going from 65 to 85 is a 20-point jump, but from 95 to 100 is only 5, which convinces the other person that they're squeezing you dry. The precise final number sounds like the product of careful calculation rather than a guess. And the non-monetary throw-in, a CD player, a small favor, something unexpected, triggers reciprocity and signals that you've truly hit your ceiling. Remember the Haitian kidnapping from earlier? The one that ended at $4,751 plus a CD player? That was the Ackerman model in action. Extreme anchor at 3,000, gradual raises, a weird, precise final number, and a random gift that said, "This is literally all I have left to give." But before you can bargain effectively, Voss says you need to understand who you're dealing with. He breaks negotiators into 3 broad types: analysts, accommodators, and assertives, and each one operates by completely different rules. Analysts are methodical. They prepare obsessively. They hate surprises, and silence for them means they're thinking, not that they're angry or inviting you to talk more. If you're dealing with an analyst, bring data, be patient. Don't expect immediate counteroffers. Accommodators are relationship builders. They love conversation. They want to be on great terms with everyone. The danger is that they'll agree to things they can't actually deliver just to keep the peace. If you're dealing with an accommodator, be friendly, but use calibrated questions to push them from talk toward action. Assertives are the firebrands. They want to win. They want to be heard, and they cannot listen to you until they believe you've heard them. If you're negotiating with an assertive, focus on listening first. Mirrors work beautifully. So do labels and summaries. The magic words you're waiting for are "that's right," which from an assertive often sounds like "that's it exactly." Here's the thing most people get wrong. We assume everyone negotiates the way we do. Voss calls this the "I am normal" paradox. You think your approach to the world is the default, and you project it onto everyone else. But with 3 types in the world, there's a 66% chance the person across the table sees things completely differently than you do. The old golden rule says treat others the way you want to be treated. The black swan rule says something different. Treat them the way they need to be treated. And the only way to know what they need is to listen, observe, and classify before you ever start bargaining. One final lesson from this chapter. When the negotiation gets heated, and it will, remember this: the person across the table is never the enemy. The unsolved problem is the enemy. You and your counterpart are partners trying to defeat that problem together. The moment you make it personal, you lose. Conflict handled well produces creativity and resolution. Conflict handled badly produces wreckage. So prepare your Ackerman plan. Know your counterpart's style. And when the punches come, and they will come, take them without flinching. Then respond with a calibrated question and watch the dynamic shift. Chapter 10. Find the Black Swan. June 17th, 1981. A warm spring day in Rochester, New York. A 37-year-old man named William Griffin walked down the stairs from his bedroom and without warning fired 3 shotgun blasts that killed his mother and a handyman hanging wallpaper and critically wounded his stepfather. Then he left the house. He shot a workman and 2 bystanders as he jogged 2 blocks to a neighborhood bank. He stormed inside, took 9 employees hostage, and ordered the customers to leave. For the next 3.5 hours, Griffin shot at everything that moved. He wounded the first 2 police officers who responded. He shot 6 bystanders near the bank. He fired over 100 rounds total, while the police used a garbage truck as a shield to rescue their own wounded officers. At 2:30 in the afternoon, Griffin waved his hostages into a back office and had the manager call the police with a message. Either a cop comes to the front entrance at 3 o'clock for a shootout, or he starts killing hostages and throwing bodies out the door. Now here is a fact that was considered absolute truth in 1981. In the entire history of American hostage situations, no hostage taker had ever killed a hostage on a deadline. Deadlines were always bluffs, ways to create urgency, while the bad guys figured out what they really wanted. Money, respect, a helicopter. Everyone knew that. At exactly 3 o'clock, Griffin pointed at a 29-year-old bank teller named Margaret Moore and told her to walk to the glass front doors. She was crying. She told him she was a single mother with a young son. Griffin didn't seem to hear her. When Moore reached the vestibule, Griffin fired 2 shotgun blasts. Both struck her in the midsection. The impact blew her through the glass door. Margaret Moore died on the sidewalk. Outside, law enforcement went silent. It was now obvious that Griffin didn't want money. He didn't want respect. He didn't want a helicopter. He walked to the bank's full-length window and pressed his body against the glass, in full view of a sniper stationed across the street. A sniper he'd shot at earlier that day. Less than a second later, the sniper's bullet ended it. What happened in Rochester that day was something that had never been imagined. Not unlikely, unimagined. That is the essence of a black swan. The term comes from a simple historical fact. Until the 17th century, every swan anyone had ever seen was white. So in London, calling something a black swan meant calling it impossible. Then a Dutch explorer went to Australia and saw a black swan. Suddenly the impossible was real. Chris Voss believes that in every negotiation, each side possesses at least 3 black swans. Pieces of information that, if discovered, would change everything. Not information that's slightly useful, information that completely reshapes the landscape. In the Griffin case, the black swans were there. A note Griffin had a hostage read over the phone contained the line, "After the police take my life." But the note was so long and rambling that nobody caught it. The double homicide at his parents' house had been reported during the standoff, but nobody connected it to the man in the bank. Every signal pointed to a man who wanted to die and wanted the police to kill him, but no one saw it because they were looking through the lens of what had always happened before. This is the danger Voss warns about. Our known knowns, our past experience, our assumptions, our templates are essential for navigating the world, but they can also blind us. When something doesn't fit the pattern, our instinct is to force it into a familiar shape rather than accept that we're looking at something new. Voss tells another story that shows black swans at their most powerful. In 2003, a North Carolina tobacco farmer named White Watson drove a tractor to Washington the 600th and parked it in the pond between the Washington Monument and the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. He claimed to have bombs inside. He threatened to blow everything up. The Capitol went into lockdown. Coming months after the Beltway sniper attacks and alongside the build-up to the Iraq War, the whole city was on edge. Voss was deployed to negotiate. Through hours of conversation, they learned Watson's story. He'd been a tobacco farmer for 5 generations, hit by drought and government cuts. He was angry. He wanted attention, and he was a veteran, which meant he had rules. Watson told them something that seemed minor at the time. As a military police officer in the 82nd Airborne, he'd learned that if you were trapped behind enemy lines, you could withdraw with honor if reinforcements didn't arrive within 3 days, but not before. That gave them a framework, Watson's own code of conduct. It was normative leverage. They couldn't threaten him into surrendering. The more they pushed, the harder he'd resist. But they could work within his worldview to find an honorable exit. About 36 hours in, an FBI agent named Winnie Miller turned to Voss. She'd been listening carefully to subtle references Watson had been making throughout the conversations. Religious references, Christian references. "He's a devout Christian," she said. "Tell him tomorrow is the dawn of the 3rd day. That's the day Christians believe Jesus Christ rose from the tomb and ascended to heaven. If Christ came out on the dawn of the 3rd day, why not Watson?" This was a black swan, not proprietary intelligence, not classified data, just a deep understanding of what mattered most to this man: his faith, his sense of honor, his need to act within a framework that made his surrender meaningful instead of humiliating. In the next conversation, they mentioned that the following morning was the dawn of the 3rd day. The negotiation operations center went so quiet you could hear heartbeats. Watson coughed. "I'll come out," he said, and he did. No explosives were found. The Capitol resumed its normal life, and a man who had been ready to die walked out alive, because someone listened deeply enough to discover the one thing that mattered more to him than his protest. This is what Voss means when he says you have to know their religion. Not always literal religion, though sometimes it is. He means the framework through which someone sees the world, their deepest values, their unspoken rules, the beliefs so fundamental they don't even think to mention them. And finding those black swans requires something that goes against every instinct most people have in a negotiation. It requires you to stop trying to be right and start trying to be curious, to stop talking and start listening, to stop fitting new information into old patterns and start letting the information tell you what the pattern actually is. Voss says that when your counterpart seems irrational, when they're doing things that don't make any sense, resist the urge to label them crazy. Instead, consider 3 possibilities. Maybe they're operating on bad information. Maybe they're constrained by something they can't or won't reveal. Or maybe they have interests you haven't discovered yet. In every case, the answer isn't to push harder. The answer is to get curious and dig deeper. Get FaceTime. Sit across from them. Watch their body language. Pay attention to the unguarded moments, the beginning of meetings before everyone puts their masks on, the end of meetings when the masks start slipping. Listen for the things people say without meaning to. Those are where black swans hide, because what you don't know can kill a deal. But what you discover, what nobody expected you to find, can transform it into something neither side imagined was possible. Key takeaways. We've covered a lot of ground. 10 chapters, dozens of stories, a toolkit built in the most extreme circumstances imaginable and proven to work everywhere, from kidnapping negotiations in the Philippines to salary conversations in a corner office. So let me bring it all together. The foundation of everything Chris Voss teaches rests on one idea that most people get backwards. Negotiation is not a battle of arguments. It is not about being the smartest person in the room. It is not about logic, leverage, or who can talk the loudest. Negotiation is about listening. It's about making the other person feel heard. And it's about using that understanding, that emotional connection, to guide them toward an outcome that works for both of you. Think about the last time you felt truly understood by someone. Not agreed with, understood. Remember how your defenses dropped, how you suddenly became more open, more willing to collaborate. That's not a coincidence. That's human wiring. And every technique in this book is designed to activate it. Let's walk through the core tools one more time, because knowing them is one thing, but internalizing them so they become second nature is what actually changes your life. Imagine you're sitting across from someone who matters, a boss, a client, a partner, someone you need something from. Here's how you play it. First, your voice. Before you say a single word, choose your tone. In most situations, default to the positive and playful voice. Light, warm, a smile in your words. People think faster and cooperate more when they're at ease. Save the late-night FM DJ voice. Slow, deep, downward inflecting, for moments when you need to project calm authority, and almost never use the direct, assertive voice. It triggers defensiveness faster than anything else you can do. Second, mirror. When you don't know what to say, repeat the last 1 to 3 critical words the other person just said. It sounds ridiculously simple, and it is, but it works because it activates a deep neurological instinct. We are drawn to what feels familiar. A mirror tells the other person's unconscious mind, I'm like you, I'm safe. And they keep talking, they elaborate, they reveal things they didn't plan to. Third, label. Watch for emotions. Listen for them in tone, word choice, body language, and when you spot one, name it out loud. It seems like this deal is making you nervous. It sounds like you've been burned by something like this before. It looks like this timeline is putting pressure on you. Always start with it seems or it sounds, never with I think, because the moment you say I, you make it about you. Then be quiet. Let the label sit. Resist the urge to fill the silence with more words, because when you name someone's feeling accurately and then stop talking, they will almost always tell you more. Labeling negatives dissolves them. Labeling positives amplifies them. Either way, you're closer to the truth. Fourth, pursue no instead of yes. When you ask someone a question designed to get a yes, they feel cornered. When you ask a question designed to get a no, is now a bad time to talk, or would it be a terrible idea if we tried this? They feel in control. And people who feel in control become more open, more creative, and more willing to consider your ideas. Fifth, aim for that's right, not you're right, which is a polite dismissal, but that's right, which means you fully understand my world. You get there by summarizing the other person's position, their words plus their feelings, so completely and so accurately that the only response left is those 2 words. When you hear that's right, the barriers come down. Real progress becomes possible. Sixth, use calibrated questions. Whenever you're stuck, whenever you feel the urge to make a demand or push for a concession, replace it with a question that starts with how or what. How am I supposed to do that? What about this is important to you? How does this affect the rest of your team? These questions give the other person the illusion of control while steering the conversation exactly where you need it to go. Seventh, remember that yes is nothing without how. When someone agrees to a deal, don't celebrate. Ask how they plan to implement it. Ask what happens if things go off track. Use the rule of 3. Get them to confirm the same commitment 3 different ways in the same conversation. If their conviction wobbles on the second or third pass, something is wrong and you need to address it before you move forward. Eighth, when it's time to haggle, use the Ackerman model. Set your target. Open at 65%. Raise in decreasing increments. 85, 95, 100. Use precise, non-round numbers on your final offer and throw in a small non-monetary item to signal you've hit your absolute ceiling. The decreasing raises convince the other person they've squeezed you dry. The odd numbers make your figure feel calculated and immovable. Ninth, never forget the people you can't see. Behind every negotiator is a team. Bosses, partners, board members, spouses, who can approve or destroy a deal you thought was done. Ask about them. How does this affect everybody else? How on board are the people not in this room? Because the deal killer is almost always someone who was never at the table. And 10th, find the black swans. In every negotiation, there are at least 3 pieces of information that would change everything if they surfaced. Your job is to hunt for them, not by asking direct questions. People often don't know what they don't know, but by listening with extreme curiosity, by getting FaceTime, by paying attention to unguarded moments, by refusing to label someone as crazy, and instead asking, what am I missing? Now, here's something Voss says near the end of the book that I think is the most important idea of all. Most of us avoid negotiation because we're afraid of conflict. Our palms sweat, our stomachs tighten. We'd rather give in, split the difference, and call it a day than sit in the discomfort of holding firm. But what are we actually afraid of? It's not the person across the table. They're not going to reach over and hit us. What we're afraid of is the conflict itself, the primal fear of being rejected by the tribe. And so we compromise, we settle, we accept deals that leave value on the table and resentment in our chest. Voss says this fear is the single biggest obstacle to getting what you want out of life. And the way past it is not aggression, it's not manipulation, it's empathy, combined with the courage to push for what you believe is fair, because pushing hard for what you believe is not selfish, it's not bullying. When you use the tools in this book, when you listen deeply, acknowledge the other person's world, and guide them toward a solution that truly works, you are not taking from them, you are helping them discover an outcome they didn't know was possible. That is what the best negotiators do. They don't defeat their counterpart. They turn their counterpart into a partner, and together they find something better than either side imagined walking in. At the very beginning of this video, we watched a former FBI agent sit down across from 2 Harvard professors who thought they were going to teach him a lesson, and he flipped the entire dynamic with 5 words. How am I supposed to do that? That question, so simple, so disarming, contains everything this book is about. It doesn't attack, it doesn't demand, it doesn't argue, it invites. It makes the other person lean in instead of push back. And it works whether you're negotiating with a terrorist, a Harvard professor, or the person sitting across the dinner table from you tonight. So let me ask you something. Think about the one conversation in your life right now that you've been avoiding, the raise you haven't asked for, the boundary you haven't set, the deal you know you're leaving money on the table in. What would happen if you walked into that conversation tomorrow? Not with aggression, not with fear, but with curiosity, with a label, with a calibrated question, with the willingness to listen deeply enough that the other person says that's right. What would change? If this breakdown gave you value, the full book goes much deeper, with dozens more stories, real-world scripts, and a complete negotiation preparation sheet that Voss uses with every client. I'd highly recommend picking up a copy. I'll leave a link to the book on Amazon and Audible in the description below and in the pinned comment. And if you're ready for more, I've got another deep dive coming soon that pairs perfectly with this one, because learning to negotiate is only half the battle. The other half is understanding how people think. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. In the meantime, go practice your mirrors. I promise the first one will feel ridiculous, but by the third, you'll be hooked. Thanks for listening. I'll see you in the next one.